Welcome to the Engage program, where we invite thought leaders within public practice accounting to discuss how accounting firms are taking on a stronger advisory focus. Over the course of this program, we'll be considering how firms can really engage their clients through value-added services. I'd like to begin by introducing today's special guest, Stephen Eager, Managing Director of MYP Corporation. Stephen is a highly respected executive with numerous CEO and management roles in large accounting, legal, financial services and consulting organisations. A regular contributor at conferences and in the media, Stephen has worked extensively with the SME sector. His firm, MYP Corporation, provides web-based tools, solutions and information for leaders advising and managing businesses. MYP provides software applications to support CRM, sales and marketing strategies, project management, document management, process automation and much more. Welcome, Stephen.
Thanks very much, Dale. Lovely to join you.
In this session, we'll be discussing what business accounting firms are really in and how they can go about engaging better with their business clients. Stephen, can I start by asking, from your perspective, what does the future look like for accounting firms?
Well, I think it's going to look very different to what it does now, and that's probably not a surprise. I think it probably will in most industries. I think some of the key changes is that firms will either move towards a larger scale compliance type business where they're focused very much on the efficiency of driving a commoditised compliance solution and services business. But I think the larger bulk of accounting firms will move very much more towards a value-added space, and I think that will ultimately, whether it's 5, 10 or 15 years, that over that period of time will move from 70 to 90% of the income for accounting firms being driven by tax and compliance services, and it will look more like 60 to 80% of revenue coming from value-added advice services. So it's a pretty critical and substantive change.
Yeah, it's interesting because I'm already seeing firms set really objective targets around that, and I think firms I'm working with are aiming to get 30 to 50% advisory in the short term, so I can certainly see it going that way. Stephen, just one comment you made. Certainly attitudes have changed in recent years. Principals and partners of firms recognise that the future will be different, but I find they still find themselves stuck in the present. They really find it difficult to change processes and behaviours. From your point of view, what's the most important thing that actually encourages real change within accounting firms?
Well, I think if they rely upon some inspiration from above to make change, it's not going to happen. I think the reality is it's going to be a fundamental mindset shift, and in many cases that's going to be driven by pain rather than vision, because I think there are so many vested interests in the current structures and status quos within firms, even reward structures, etc. So until you start seeing real leadership, and I think this is one of the key issues, until you start seeing real leadership where those leaders insist on their team adopting change, it's not going to happen. And I guess the example I like to give, I believe it's quite possible because accountants have the capacity and the intellectual capacity for this sort of change. As I regularly say to people, they've proved that they can be process-oriented by the fact that they provide and drive compliance businesses and services. They need to apply that same logic and thinking to the advice side. Unfortunately, the habit has been that the advice side is ad hoc and reactionary, and so that's just become the norm. If they could apply the same logic to the compliance side of their business to the advisory side, they're 90% of the way there.
Absolutely. I know you talk a little bit about the digital disruption. Can you give me more feedback on what that means?
Well, if we think about the concept of digital disruption, I guess in essence, if we move beyond the screen that we have here onto from the change issue to the disruption issue, the reality is, and I guess this addresses the perspective of pain, because those people that don't embrace the change and the positiveness of that and do it in a proactive way will be left with a reactionary response to the pain of having not changed, because there are enough accounting firms out there that are serious about an advisory approach and doing it in a methodical and systematic and industrialised way, that those that don't will be left way behind. And ultimately the pain of that will be felt in their businesses and in their profits and in their retention of staff and in the interesting work that they do and so forth. So the key issue here, if we look at the digital disruption map from Deloitte, is that what it's suggesting, if we look at it here, we've got this concept of timing and the short period of time and the size of the impact of that digital change or disruption. And we can see here that professional services, of which obviously accounting is one, what they're arguing is that the time between now and the change and the scale of the change is such that it fits into the short fuse, big bang. And again, the reality is that we're now at a point where accounting firms can no longer continue to put this off, where they try to justify the fact that they're not doing anything by we're too small or we're training people or we've got this issue or that issue or whatever. At some point in the not too distant future, that choice about when to get involved and when not to get involved will actually be taken out of their hands if they want to be competitive. And really that's what that's saying, is that it doesn't matter what industry you're in, there are a lot of industries that are going to see fundamental reshaping of that industry as a result of the impact of the digital opportunities that are out there. And certainly there's no question we're seeing that happen with pace inside the accounting profession. And I guess, just sticking with that point, I guess what we would argue is that it's obviously not just technology that drives change. Technology, and in fact we would argue technology is more of an enabler. I guess the only reason we would argue that it's driving change is that if you don't embrace it, then obviously ultimately you're going to get left behind, and whether that's because your cost base is too high and your inefficiencies are too poor or too significant, etc. But there are other factors, and obviously we've got some of them here, including things like competitors who are adapting and changing. We've got people out there who are innovating because they see problems and they're using technology as a mechanism to solve problems. But there are people with vision. Whilst 90% of people change through pain, there are still a significant number of people that have a vision for what could be and have the enthusiasm and the energy to go and chase that. And the final point there is obviously people with necessity, and obviously the old expression that necessity is the mother of invention. And for these reasons, there are people out there that are trying to achieve and adapt and improve this whole space.
Stephen, do you think there are a lot of firms out there actually being really successful in the way they work with clients? I see a lot of firms trying very hard, but not many firms. I mean, they certainly have success, but not really firms really achieving great success at this time. They're still struggling with that burden of compliance, which always seems to be preventing them from doing the things that they want to do.
Well, quite frankly, I mean, look, we all run businesses, we're all flat out, we're all busy, and quite honestly, I actually believe that it's more of an excuse than anything else.
Yeah.
And I know some people might think that's a bit harsh, but to me, it's all about the comfort of the familiar.
Yep.
When people are doing something that they know and are comfortable with what they're doing, as much as they don't like it, or it's tedious, or it's not profitable as they would like it to be, the reality is that adapting and change is uncomfortable for a lot of people. And not only that, I think it actually raises two key issues. One is that really there is a lack of leadership around how to drive change. And secondly, within the staff of a lot of firms, there is resistance to change. And when you combine a lack of effective leadership with a lot of people who don't want to see change because it makes their life a bit uncomfortable for a period of time, you then see this inertia. And in that sort of context, that's where you start to see problems. And it's not until these businesses genuinely industrialise their advisory businesses that they will be able to achieve a multiplier effect in their business. And what we know is that when businesses can apply that multiplier effect and can industrialise the advisory side of their business, over a very short period of time, they can be doubling and tripling their revenue from even their existing client base without even growing their client.
So when you talk about industrialise, I assume you mean leverage and systems and processes to make things consistent.
Yeah, so having a methodology,
yep.
but not just having a methodology, but then automating as much of that methodology as possible so that where the advisor is spending their time is only at those points where there's a value add. Where they're not adding value, the system should be able to cope with what needs to be done. So, I mean, in the context of change, as we've got here, who's resisting it? Well, the people who are comfortable, the people who are incompetent, people who attend but don't perform, people in leadership positions who have no vision, and people who romanticise history, the good old days and so forth. The good old days are in fact in front of us. The best days are in front of us, not behind us. And, it's a change of mindset that gets people in a space that says there is so much more opportunity ahead of us than there is behind us, and we want to embrace that. So there are people that resist change, and that's unfortunate. As we point out here, the question is, do you have these people up here, those that resist change, do you have them in your organisation, or even worse, are you one of them? Do you defer what you do to these people? And this is one of the key issues. I've had people say to me, I'll see what my staff want to do. Well, if we're driving our businesses with what our staff want to do, then those businesses won't change. It's a case of this is where leadership comes into play. And we've got to have a vision about what we want our business to be, and we put in place our methodologies and our systems and industrialise it. And if staff don't apply those, then they shouldn't be in the business. And the logic is already there in these businesses because, as I say to people, if you've got staff that don't apply your compliance processes, what's going to happen to them? Well, obviously they're going to get disciplined, and if they keep not applying the processes and systems, they're going to be terminated from that business. Well, for some reason, accounting firms, in many cases, don't apply that logic to the advice side. They, again, are stuck in this view that it's an ad hoc, reactive space. If they can get out of that and understand there's a methodology, there's process, there's automation, there's industrialisation, and they can apply that, then they can also then hold their staff accountable to it and say, if you don't comply with our systems and processes, there is not going to be a role here. And in many environments, to be quite frank, it's going to take a bit more honest talking from leaders to actually achieve that outcome.
And obviously a key issue there is having the right people in leadership positions. It's certainly a lot easier to work with the skills and capabilities and develop your staff, but when you've got partners in leadership positions who perhaps resist some of this, it can be a much greater challenge, can't it, to actually bring about that change. Takes a fair amount of time.
Absolutely, and there will be some people that are going to confront the ultimate question, which is, do I want to be in business with those people that resist this necessary change, or you're going to maintain our position on a sinking ship, even if it's sinking slowly, it's still sinking, and it's only as people are gargling for air that suddenly somebody will say, well, I don't want to be in business with you anymore because you're dragging me under. And I've recently had these sorts of conversations with people. So yes, there are some challenging conversations that will be ahead for some people. And I guess part of this, and it all feeds into this this notion of leadership and who we're in business with and the mindset of people and all the rest of it. And we use a simple little example that we see here. I ask people to spot the difference, and on the face of it, there is no difference because they're identical pictures. But if we drill below that, what we know is that really, from a mindset perspective, everything is different between these two pictures, because for one person, the glass on the left, for example, is half empty. It represents fear and everything to be lost. Change is threatening and frightening, and if we do this, what are we going to lose? Whereas the glass on the right is half full and it represents everything that's possible and to be gained. Quite frankly, if you have people in your business that don't share the optimistic view about what you're trying to do and aren't prepared to align themselves to that approach, then every step forward is one where you're carrying lead weight with you, because you're carrying all of those people who are resisting you. And as we all know, the difference between the people who are positive and optimistic and are driving forward and those that are pulling against you is night and day. And obviously that process in itself can burn a lot of people out because they just don't have the energy to drag themselves and everybody else with them.
Absolutely.
Okay. One of the things, again, we also talk to people about, and particularly accountants, we regularly stand up in front of lots of people and say, and talk about stereotypes and say, if I use this word, what do you think? And we might start by saying, a used car salesman or a politician, and inevitably the language there is never positive about those labels. But if we say the word accountant, what's the first word that comes to people's mind? And this is with SME and business owners and so on. Every time we've said that, the answer is boring. Now, what that tells me is that whilst most people have an adequate relationship with their accountant, they don't see them as dynamic and driving value and opportunity and so forth. And I think part of that is because many professionals, not just accountants, actually don't understand the business they're in. And so what we argue is that it's about really engaging and understanding your client, because the reality is that if you're an accountant, you're not in the accounting business, you're in the hopes and dreams business, you're in the make my life simpler business, or the help me feel in control business, or the make me look good business, or the save my house business. In other words, you're in the business of whatever your client's objectives are. As long as those objectives are lawful and moral, then that's the business we're in. And if we put a bit more context around that, we're in the business of understanding people. And one of the things that we spend a lot of time doing with what we do is providing a framework for an emotional connection with clients. And often that's not something that comes naturally to accountants. But if they're going to move in a systematic and industrialised way into the advice space, they are going to have to have a framework for connecting more effectively with people and having a much deeper understanding. Because all of those things I put there before, the hopes and dreams business or the make my life simpler or save my house business or whatever, play to people's emotional context. And this is absolutely fundamental. And if part of their process, part of an accounting firm's process in engaging with clients and driving an industrialised advisory framework does not start with this sort of engagement process, then they're doomed before they even start.
Yes, and it's just reinforced by a discussion I had a couple of days ago with an HR manager from a medium-sized company, and she was a medium-sized accounting practice. She was saying how difficult sometimes it is to get people with a technical mindset to really start thinking about emotional context because they're not used to it. Often they need that advice and support, the scripts, the processes to start doing it so they can start developing the confidence and the capability.
You're absolutely right, Dale, and I think that's the fundamental point. Because they have a set of skills that they need to have, which are much more about logic and analysis and so forth, often they haven't developed a lot of those other skills. That's not been part of their daily experience. And so the framework that enables us to capture the information in and around this emotional engagement space. So if we again, one of the interesting things around the proactive advice concept is, who's leading whom, and one of the things we talk about is the principle of proactive business advice, and our view is that it's one where the advisor should be the one identifying a lot of the issues as opposed to reacting to issues identified by the client, because the reality is most clients don't know what the issues are and they can't identify them. They don't have the experience or the knowledge or whatever, and unless it's something that's really bad or it's an opportunity where they require advice to make it happen, often they'll just do it themselves and end up making a mess of everything. So our argument is, and again, being pretty strong about this, my view is that many advisors are in fact negligent by not taking a more proactive approach. If they're sitting around waiting for an instruction from the client, and the client doesn't know what they don't know, or the client's limiting the scope of advice of the advisor, it means they don't understand where the advisor can actually add value. And the advisor has therefore given up that right to that nature, to that type of relationship with the client. So, as we say there, unless advisors drive the advice process, the client never will. And accountants have been talking about proactive advice for decades, but as we say here, if it's not structured, if it's not systemised, if it's not automated, it will not happen. And we see this day in, day out.
Yeah, and even from a practical point of view, I've lost count of the number of times I've sat down with managers and partners and talked about client needs, and quite often I'm given the excuse, well, the client doesn't really need the service, or they don't want it, or they can't afford it. Often I think what they're really saying is, I don't think I can persuade my clients, or I haven't actually sat down and had that discussion with them. I'm making all sorts of assumptions about what they need and don't need without ever having taken the opportunity to sit down and really understand them and help them understand themselves.
Well, I totally agree, but even beyond that, even worse, I don't think many actually know how they can add value. And therefore, this whole conversation about getting into an advisory space becomes scary because it means that I may have to talk about something that I don't have an answer for. Well, that's a non-reason for all of this. My view is, if you don't understand something, then you're going to bring proactively to the client and to the table somebody who can support the client in that issue. And again, this is where people are giving up one of the greatest marketing opportunities, and that is to bring other advisors into meetings with clients. I keep reiterating constantly to organisations that if you want to be effective in marketing, it's not about brochures and websites and all that sort of stuff. And it's amazing to me how accountants and advisors and professionals and all the rest of it will spend tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, on marketing collateral and events and websites and all this sort of stuff, when the most effective marketing is structural marketing. And that includes doing things like bringing all the client's other advisors into a meeting once a year with the client, where we sit around and proactively talk about how we can collectively work together to get the outcomes the client is trying to achieve. And the amazing thing about that is, not only does the client love it because they've got all these big brains sitting there working out what needs to be done, but now you're building relationships, you're creating opportunities in the conversations and so forth. These are all things that can be done, and they can be done very easily. It just takes a bit of systemisation, a bit of organisation, coordination, automation. Okay. I guess sort of moving towards the end here, and this picture sums it up in many environments, and it's not all, but in many accounting firms. And I talked previously about the fact that their own business structures and reward structures, etc., are a big part of the problem. And we can see here that in many firms, they've got themselves set up with their partners or directors, and each director has their own, pot of clients and staff and so forth. And so in that environment, you've got tax team 1 and tax team 2, doing their own thing, working with their own clients, and there's only rare and reactive engagement between the teams. And then on the fringes of that, you've got, these other service areas, whether that's financial planning or consulting or self-managed super or whatever it might be. And they're sort of like young Oliver with his begging bowl out saying, please, sir, can I have some more? And they're all, as I said, they're, stunted and frustrated, when the reality is that the non-tax and compliance areas of the business should be accounting for 60 to 80% of the revenue. And if firms don't have that sort of ratio, then they're still a long way from securing the maximum opportunity that they can get out of the whole value-add advice space. So what we argue is that they should, in fact, move to more of this type of model. And this is where they position themselves as having a strategic role, and in essence, you're separating your strategic work from your transactional work. And transactional work is anything that either comes out of the strategic process, where we identify gaps and issues that need to be addressed, or that's the reactive stuff, where a client wants to buy something or sell something or has made a mess of something and needs to get it cleaned up. All of that type of work sits at the transactional or specialty end of things. The emotional engagement side of it sits at the top. And both of those lines of work generate income. The top line, the strategic engagement, drives high-level, high-value annuity income streams, and the transactional work obviously drives the projects, the ongoing work in that space.
Stephen, when looking
and this is where it should be.
Yeah, just Stephen, looking at that model, are you talking about different hats for the same people, or different areas of focus for different people within the organisation? Some would be specialty managers, some strategic, or essentially two hats for the same person?
Look, by and large, I would be saying that it's in many cases different hats. Certainly, most people within the firm are probably going to be specialty hats. There will be some people that have both, and there'll be some people that will just play the strategic role. I mean, I work with organisations across all the professional services, and it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter whether you're a lawyer or an accountant, you're a financial planner, or you're a consultant. The reality is that if you get the right people engaging at the strategic level, you will drive so much work and opportunity across the other parts of the business, and it also achieves a lot of other things. It then breaks down this notion that people have clients, because it's firms that have clients or businesses that have clients. And if we extrapolate this out further, it's one of the major reasons why professional service organisations are so poorly valued. I mean, the prices that you pay for most professional service organisations are woeful. And the key reason for that is because the loss of people and the loss of clients is such a big risk. It's only once you start to position your organisation as a team of people, and any of those people can be replaced at any point in time, and the client is engaging with a business and a methodology and a system and a process, which is all of their intellectual property, their information, and a packaging of all of that. That's when the business values the firm, okay? And the view that the value of the firm is the sum of the intellect of the people in the business is actually invalid. You know, there are some very, very successful businesses where it has people who are not of the greatest intellect. Obviously, we want people who know their business and who are capable of giving good advice and all the rest of it. But again, a really strong business model will always gazump a team of brilliant people and a bad business model. And that's just the reality of it. And the reality is that most professional service organisations have a bad business model. And this is about renovating that model so that the structure and the vision and the objectives all align, if that makes sense.
Yeah, most certainly, and I think they're really, really, really useful insights. I think if partners and managers really sat down and looked at their practices, they probably agree exactly with what you say. So there really is a need to change the way that we run our businesses and the way we communicate with our clients. Stephen, I think we'll sort of tie it up there. I'd really like to thank you for your insights today. I think it's been a really interesting session. There's no doubt there's a very strong need for accounting firms to create structure and process around their business advisory platform as a first step, and I think that message has come across consistently in the discussion today. What can MYP Corporation do to assist? How do you help with this process?
Okay, well, look, fundamentally our argument is this. We provide a range of business tools, advice tools, process and automation tools, etc. And they all plug in together. They're all part of a total methodology. Part of the challenge for firms at the moment is that there's a lot of white noise out there around tools, but pretty much every one of them is a standalone. And so firms end up with this mishmash of different tools that do different things, and they don't know where it fits, and there's not integration of information and so on across it. We have worked very hard and invested very heavily in building a framework that provides a total toolkit, which can be either standalone tools or total methodologies. And so some of the things that we do, you can see there. A number of these are about to be released very shortly, but from CRM systems and marketing solutions and so on through to advice tools, gap analysis, benchmarking. Very shortly, we're about to release Regen, which is a succession planning, valuation, due diligence tool that does an awful lot more than that. Juice Console, which is a real-time business planning and performance management tool that connects directly into Xero. Estate planning for life. Shortly we're releasing an HR management module, etc. eScope, instant proposals and so forth. There's a plethora of things, and they form part of a total, integrated, coordinated framework that's inexpensive and very efficient. And I guess I just reinforce one thing. One of the things we talk a bit about is the notion of the capitalised cost of labour. And fundamentally what happens in most professional organisations is when they get busy, their immediate thought goes to recruiting that next person. They've got to find somebody else. When inevitably, we argue their thinking should go to efficiencies and how we can use the digital era to drive better performance and more productivity out of the people that we have. Because the reality is, employing someone that costs you $60,000 a year is the equivalent of borrowing $1 million. And the thing that we know is people will think many times before they borrow $1 million, but they'll act pretty quickly when it comes to employing a $60,000 person. The net impact on your cash flow is exactly the same. So what we argue is there's a world of solutions out there in the MYP environment, and you can get access to them inexpensively and drive efficiency, methodology, industrialisation, etc. across your business.
Very, very interesting. No, thank you very much, Stephen. Thank you for your feedback and input today. Much appreciated.
You're welcome.
As we finish up this session, I'd just like to mention Make It Happen. If you're interested in further information on how you can actually implement your advisory platform, take a look at the Make It Happen coaching program, which commences in 2015. Thank you for listening to today's session, and please take a look at our other presentations in the Engage program. We'll see you soon. Thank you.